Welcome to the Accent Training Podcast, a podcast where I teach you how to take control of your spoken English and better communicate with Americans. Maybe you communicate with Americans for business. Maybe you live in the United States, or maybe you just want to show your friends that your English is a little bit better than theirs. I respect your ambition, and I am happy to be your coach as we learn the American accent. Today's episode is not going to focus on the accent. However, it's going to focus on restaurants and bars and alcohol. That's right, today we're going to talk a little bit about alcohol because whether you drink or not, the fact is Americans drink a lot. And when I say drink, I'm referring to drink alcohol. That's something to keep in mind. If an American asks you, you want to go for a drink after work? They're probably referring to alcohol, not tea. More likely beer, maybe wine, something light. Now myself, I'm not a big drinker. I'll enjoy a beer or a glass of wine now and then, but I'm not a heavy drinker. However, I wanted to find an expert on this subject to make sure we have clear education and clear communication. And so today I will interview a bartender. And this bartender is my brother, as a matter of fact. His name is Andrew, and he has a lot of important language tips when it comes to the Canadian or American culture in a bar or a restaurant. Now, you listening may not be much of a drinker, and in fact, you may not even want to know about these things. And I respect that, and I invite you to check out another episode. But for those of you listening who may be going out for drinks with your colleagues, or maybe you got a hot date coming up and you don't want to hesitate when you're making an order, and anyone else interested, make sure that you listen all the way through so that you have a clear and sound understanding of how to navigate a night out at a bar or a restaurant. Let's get into it, folks. Well, today I have here Mr. Andrew. Andrew is a professional bartender, and he's my brother. So, it's an honor to have him on the Accent Training Podcast today. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm good. Yeah, well, hi. My name's Andrew. I work in Canada as a bartender and also server.
And how long have you been working in bartending?
Out here, 5 years. Before that, maybe another 2 or 3. So I guess about 7 years.
Wow, that just flew by, eh?
Yeah, I got hooked pretty quickly. I just, I was working initially on a farm, and then my friend had a job at a restaurant, and I went in to do a shift and collected my tips on the first day, and that was the last day I worked on the farm.
And so it's the tips that pulled you in?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
well, also, I'm not just bartending. I mostly do serving.
What's the difference exactly? Isn't a bartender a server anyway?
Pretty much, but the bartender is just going to make the drinks, which I think is obvious, but the server is the one who would go out and, talk to people at a table and take their order, or usually have those conversations away from the bar, and the bartender does all that behind the bar while making drinks for the servers.
And who gets the better tips?
It's normally split pretty evenly throughout.
Well, what I'd like to do here today is I'd like to walk you through a scenario of going to the bar. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow this scenario. We'll take a typical person named John. That's a pretty common name. So John's going to the bar, and what I'd like you to do is navigate John through his evening, step by step, and tell me how the typical person would go through that kind of a situation.
I guess it kind of depends when you're going, out to the restaurant. If you're going, but either way, let's say you go in. Initially, you'd want to look for a sign that says, please wait to be seated or please seat yourself. I think that's pretty standard. And, if it says, please seat yourself, go wherever you like. And then if it says, wait to be seated, obviously wait there. And then a host will take care of you. So that's another job in a restaurant, is the host. And they kind of greet people at the door and put them where they should be.
So let me stop you for one moment there. So to clarify, so, you walk in, you look for a sign. If there's nobody standing there, you got to spot the sign, and it'll either tell you take a seat, and then you just sit wherever you like.
Yeah. Follow the rules of what the sign says. But I think, as far as I know, every restaurant would indicate whether you seat yourself or you wait.
Okay, and so then if you wait, then you're waiting for the host or hostess, and so they direct you to the best place to be seated. Is it appropriate to request certain seating from the host or the hostess? Like if they want a certain area, if they want to be by a window, is that appropriate?
For sure. I mean, their job is to try to put you in the spot that you'd have your best experience. And that's normally from depending on how busy staff are, they wouldn't want to put you somewhere that somebody's really busy where they're going to take care of you. They'd want to spread you out. But if you want to sit in a certain spot, then they'll normally work with you.
Oh, and if that spot isn't available, maybe they'll just give you a temporary spot, or they'll tell you that where you can wait until that's available.
If you have a preference of what you want, then you should vocalize it and make it known, and then they'll normally try to work with you.
I like the way that you put it. They want to work with you. Like, they want you to have a pleasant experience, and if you have a specific thing that can make that happen, then they're happy to accommodate it.
There's a couple instances like that where it's better that you say what you want, because they're not against it at all. It's just that they can't read your mind.
You don't want to sound demanding. At the same time, there is a fine line between making a genuine, a simple request and making a demand. And I have had experiences where non-native speakers, for them, they were just making a request. I understood that they were making a demand. So if they want to make that request, what word choice would you say they should use? What should they say to request for certain seating politely?
Yeah, I would say, is there any chance, like word it in a positive, polite way, not a demanding way. Like, say, is there any chance I can be seated near a window, or is it too busy that I can't be seated here? Or you want to use a positive way. So I guess I would say, may I sit there, or things like that.
I like how you said this, because you actually just brought some really valuable information to the table. Now, for those listening, when he's referring to a positive way, for those English scholars out there, he's referring to asking indirectly by saying, is there a chance? Like, they understand that you're saying, I want this, but you're requesting it by simply saying, is there a chance? Is there a possibility? And the way that you worded that, that's perfect, because a lot of non-native speakers don't know to say that. Is there a chance? Is there a chance I can do this? A chance I can do that? Is there a chance I can sit here instead of over there in that dark spot beside the speaker?
Yeah, that's true. It's a good way to put it. And I think that's a quite common way to ask for something, is, I guess, like you said, indirectly saying it. Because if you come up and say, let me sit there, it's like, okay, well, you're kind of just demanding it, but you need to ask, because you don't know what the situation of the restaurant might be. And maybe there's a group coming that asked or reserved for a specific table. So you need to just ask, assuming that it's possible that you wouldn't be able to sit there.
That's it. Otherwise, you may just look at a table, assume it's open, and now you're in a bad mood because you directly tell the waiter, I want that table. And then, now the waiter's in a bad mood, and they've had to explain to you this demand isn't possible, and it just sets everybody off. So, good direction. We're asking indirectly. And so John comes in He's greeted by a hostess. The hostess directs him towards his seat, and he says, actually, I was hoping I could get a seat over by the window. Is there a chance there's a window seat open? And they say, oh, yeah, absolutely. We've got a table that we're just cleaning up there now. They bring you over. You're seated. So far, so good. Now, once seated, what do people typically order? Like, what comes first? You sit down.
There's a few things, I guess. You're gonna get your menus, and the server might come over and introduce themselves and give you a water and get your menu. But yeah, you'd normally start off with what you would want to drink. And that might take, like the server's going to give you the menu, and they'll go off and do their own thing, and they'll give you 3 or 4 minutes, and then they'll come back and assume that you're ready to order something to drink, whether it's pop or if you're getting an alcoholic drink.
Quick question. The water. In a lot of countries, water is not safe to drink if it's from the tap. In the case of your bar, what would you say? Is it, if you bring someone a water, is it something that they can trust? Because I'm sure people sometimes receive water and they think, yeah, you know what? I don't want that water. What do you think?
Yeah, water's incredible. It's because where I work is actually on a mountain, in the Rockies in Canada. So we actually, I don't know if it's called distill the water or filter it or whatever it is, but they do it just beside where the restaurant and the hotel are. So it's actually water right off the mountain. So it's as safe as possible.
Folks, this is just a quick message to remind you to subscribe to the Accent Training Podcast. If you haven't already, you don't want to miss a second of this accent training experience. And you want to be updated whenever I've got new content out for you. So if you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe now. That's good. All right. Well, anyway, so water is standard. You're going to get a water. And then, as you mentioned, the waiter will give you a couple minutes, maybe let you look at the drink menu. You decide on what kind of pop. And by the way, for my listeners, pop is what we call soda in Canada. It's people don't know that down here in Mexico. They call everything soda. Actually, they call everything Coke instead of even poppers. Anyway, so you get yourself a nice pop or soda, or you could order yourself an alcoholic beverage, as you mentioned. What is a typical alcoholic drink that someone might order before a meal? Because you're saying that this is before the food even comes. Maybe they've had a little bit of bread. What is a typical alcoholic drink that someone might have before a meal?
Like it depends on what what the person's up to. Like if they're out with family, maybe you would ask if anybody wanted to share a bottle of wine with you. If you're in the mood for that. If you're eating, pub food, which is like wings or a burger, you'd probably get, something easy drinking like a beer. If it's later on in the evening, you might get yourself a cocktail. It depends on what the situation is.
I get you. Okay. So it depends on the time of day, who you're with. Like, if John's coming in alone, he's not going to typically get a whole bottle of wine to himself. Would you serve an individual person a bottle of wine as a bartender?
No, not all at once, because there's liquor laws in different areas. So where I'm working, you would technically have to be serving a wine. There would have to be 2 people sharing the bottle for you to be giving a bottle.
Wait, quick question. Liquor laws. Liquor. That's another good word. What is liquor?
Well, I guess liquor is just a type of alcohol, I guess I refer to it as like a hard liquor. It's going to be like your gin, your vodka, your whiskey, and then there's liqueurs, which I'm not sure what the complete difference is, but those are softer things. So those would be like, I don't know, peach schnapps or things that you make you add into a drink and they're not as strong.
That's not something I guess you would typically have before a meal. I guess, they're kind of thicker, very sugary. You say something light, though, a beer, Now, there are different names, that we use for different types of beers, like lighter beers and darker beers. We call them like
Yeah.
IPA, lager, ale. Can you break any of these down? Because, folks may be looking at a menu and it says lagers and they don't know what the difference is between lager and pale ale.
I don't know for sure, like the actual definite distinction of them all. IPA anyway, but when you look at them, you can kind of guess what the flavor is going to be. So, like an IPA is like an Indian pale ale, and that is going to be, they call it like hoppier, but it has, you normally a higher alcohol percentage. It tastes a little bit more bitter.
Hoppier, Hoppier. That's how you'd say it, hoppier.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So when they make the beer, they put hops in it, and then it depends how many hops they put in it is going to make it have a different flavor.
Okay. And so darker ones are hoppier, you would say.
No, not necessarily. I think that they can be, but darker refers to like the color of the actual beer. So that might not, like when you look at it in a glass, if it's darker or lighter, you can assume that maybe a darker beer might have a higher alcohol percentage and often more calories, and a lighter beer would be, a little bit more crisp. It's like a nice summer day kind of outdoor beer that you could drink, and it's easier drinking, more watery maybe.
Better if you're starting out your meal, I suppose.
Yeah.
So a lot of people aren't very heavy drinkers, but if you're in an American restaurant, a Canadian restaurant, you're looking at your menu, now you know. A lighter colored beer, something that you can see through, it's transparent, lower alcohol content, just fine before a meal. It's not going to make you feel all dizzy or anything. Now, there's this other word I hear a lot in movies, cocktail. Yeah. What is a cocktail?
So a cocktail is any mixed drink. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be something sweet. It's really any drink that is mixed between either different types of alcohol, different types of juices or pops, or it's just anything that's mixed together in a glass.
It has to include alcohol, though.
So a cocktail has alcohol, and then there's another thing called a mocktail, and that's a non-alcoholic cocktail. So that'd be like a Shirley Temple, or something kids could have, or somebody who's pregnant. And it's something that's similar, but it's that without the alcohol.
So you can get all the tastes, and you can still try these different, drinks. But if you don't want to participate in the drinking alcohol, you would call it, I like the word you use, mocktail. Like it's mocking a cocktail. Okay, mocktail. Another word I hear a lot. I hear this in movies, and I'm sure other folks do as well. Martini. What is the difference between a cocktail and a martini? What is a martini?
Well, so yeah, like I said, a cocktail is anything that's mixed together and served. So a martini is a cocktail. A cocktail is pretty much anything that you can think of that's not, like, anything that doesn't come straight. So if you're drinking like a straight, whiskey or something with nothing mixed, then that's just something straight. But anytime you mix anything with it, it becomes a cocktail. So yeah, martini is a cocktail. It depends how you have it. Like a traditional martini would be made with gin mixed with vermouth, and they cool it down, and then they serve it, and then it serves with a garnish. So although it's almost a straight alcohol, it is still technically a cocktail.
So when you are saying straight regarding drinks, it's all about, it's like pure. Like if you're drinking a straight whiskey, it's just whiskey in the glass. There's nothing mixed.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
Ice, nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, and what is it then if you have ice in the glass, if you got whiskey in the glass and you got ice in the glass? What do you call that?
That's called on the rocks. Normally people who drink straight whiskey would be, like, often it's Scotch is what they'd be drinking, which is a whiskey just made in Scotland in this particular way. And Yeah, if you wanted it with a bit of ice, you'd just ask for it like a scotch on the rocks. Or if you wanted it with no ice, then you'd ask for a scotch neat. Neat is when there's nothing at all in it. It's just the alcohol.
And so, okay, you can order it neat, as you say. If you pick a scotch that you like in particular, you can order it neat. And that means it's straight. If it's neat, it's straight. There's nothing mixed in there. Or you could order your scotch on the rocks, and then you've got ice in there.
Yeah, the purpose of the ice is it makes the scotch diluted with a bit of water. So it's not going to taste as strong. It's not necessarily a temperature thing. It's more that you're putting something in it which takes the edge off the scotch. So it adds a little bit of water to your drink.
Ah, okay. Without just outright pouring water in it, which would dilute the flavor, it's kind of slowly adding.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've got one more martini question for you. What does James Bond drink? For you as a bartender, do you ever have folks asking that, requesting the James Bond special?
We don't, but that's called the Vesper Martini, in particular. So that's not a very common drink, but that one is gin and vodka, both mixed together with dry vermouth. So you mix the three of those together, and then you stir it and you strain it, and it's served in a glass.
The way that you've described it, I don't really follow. And that's good, because I'm not a bartender. So that just shows, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. So the James Bond drink, you say it's not common, but this evening, if John does want to order one before his meal, he is able to. Like, a bartender could possibly throw that together. Wouldn't be so bad. Okay.
Yeah, they would have everything for it.
Okay, good. Good. So John looks at the drink menu and he says, you know what, maybe for later. I'm not in the James Bond mood at the moment. I'm going to stick to a classic beer. What brand of beer would John typically go with here?
Yeah, so if you're trying to go generic, like a North American thing, you would be going for what would be like a lager. So those are going to be like your easy drinking beers, around 5% alcohol. A classic one would be like Budweiser. It's really big in the States, or Molson Canadian is a big one in Canada. Most of those big name brand beers are lagers, so that's what you'd be ordering.
So those are the common ones, lagers, not really dark beers, as we've spoken about, kind of light on the alcohol. And so how many lagers would somebody typically have over the course of a meal?
I guess one during their meal and maybe one before. Like I said, like that would be, some people sip on one beer throughout the whole dinner, and some people can have up to three, I guess. You wouldn't want to have too many though, because of the amount of liquid that would fill you up, so it might ruin your dinner.
Yeah, there's a lot of gas in beer, and if you feel all bloated, you won't enjoy the meal in front of you. Very true. So suppose then that John and Joanne here have enjoyed their meal. They've each had 2 lagers. They're both feeling, nice little bit of a buzz. They're feeling good. And they're looking to wrap up the meal. They're looking for one more drink to have with dessert. What would we call these types of drinks, these dessert drinks that you could pair with something sweet?
Yeah, like some people call it a digestive, or just simply a dessert drink would work as well. So that depends what you want. Some people would have, this is where they might have like those martinis, that's where they would come out, or like an old fashioned is a whiskey based drink.
So something stronger, martinis like we were talking about, strong in the alcohol content, or just as well, any of these other cocktails that they might find on the menu. This is the time when you'd typically order those. Something, yeah. You've got a full belly, something that pairs with a nice sweet meal. Okay. This comes to the end of the meal. Eventually, they finish up their drinks. It's been drink number 3. They're going to go off dancing. They're going to go have some more fun. And they've got a nice night ahead of them. Now, tipping is not universal. as in leaving a little bit of extra money for your server, your bartender. If you enjoyed your experience, you leave a percentage of your bill to show your appreciation. So tell me a little bit about tipping in the North American culture, because I think it's pretty well the same between Canada and the United States. Tell me about tipping.
You give extra money, and normally it's a percentage on what your total bill is. So you'd want to, I think standard is anywhere from, around 15% up to about 20% of what your bill is. And that's what you'd leave to pay the bartender or the server. The reason I think that tipping is, a good thing to do and a big deal is because it keeps the people who work there. Obviously it gives them money and it gives them a reason to work there, but it keeps people in the industry a little bit longer, which gives them more knowledge and they get better at their job. So you actually often get better service in areas where you do tip, because the people stick around longer and they're much more knowledgeable.
I guess at the same time, places that are known for receiving higher tips are going to attract better waiters or waitresses, or better servers, we'll say. So you're going to get better servers in places with better tippers. Yeah. And what happens if somebody doesn't leave a tip? Like, is there a consequence if somebody leaves a restaurant, no tip?
Like, what happens is the server gets a tip, and say it's 20%. So say they had $100 bill and somebody leaves the server $20. The server usually then has to give other people who work in the restaurant a portion of that tip, kind of for them to be helping, because the server doesn't do everything alone. So, a portion of it goes towards the kitchen, a portion goes towards the dishwashers, a portion goes towards the host. Like, everybody else who works there that isn't getting a tip gets a portion. So if you don't tip, that server still has to pay that amount. So they actually end up paying to take care of your table.
This little bit of appreciation that you're giving as a percentage on top of your bill is not going to the server alone. It kind of goes into everybody's pockets. It's a communal tip, you would say.
Yeah, like the big portion of it would go to the server, yes, but little bits that get spread out to everybody else. You're not just tipping just the server, you're tipping the whole restaurant, because you get service from everybody, from the person who hosts you to the drinks that are made, the food.
So tips are, okay, it's a big deal. It goes a long way, especially when a lot of people tip a generous amount of money. It means everybody's going to be happier doing their job. If you get an extra $100 at the end of the day or more for just doing your job, hey, you're going to do a really good job tomorrow, aren't you? And so on and so forth. And so while that may not exist in other countries, it does exist in Canada, and it does exist in the United States. And so if you go to a restaurant and you leave a generous tip, and as Andrew here has said, 15 to 20%, everyone's happy. That's a generous tip. 15 to 20%, people are in a good mood. Leave that, and you're ensuring that restaurant is going to continue to provide the same good service that you received in your meal. So that's why you should tip. It's a cultural thing. It doesn't exist in the same way in all cultures, but in this one, it just does. That's the reality. Okay, good. Well, I'd say over half of the people who listen to my podcast are actually outside of North America. A lot of people listening are in Asia, all over Asia, in India, in around Africa. I've got listeners in Kenya and in different countries around Europe as well, Spain and Ukraine and Russia. And so to folks who are coming to Canada, to the United States, would you say that there are opportunities for those who may be interested to get into serving or to get into bartending? Are there opportunities and openings in these positions, would you say?
Yeah, lots of people I work with now are foreign. I work with one guy who's from the Philippines, one from Mexico, there's a bunch from Australia. There's ones from all over the place.
Well, that's great that there are opportunities. And now folks know that they have the chance to work in a restaurant, but at the very least, you most certainly can take a seat confidently and communicate your drink orders when you get into a restaurant. You know what to do and how to wrap things up. You know how to tip, and you know what to drink. Now, we're going to get to wrapping this one up for today, Mr. Andrew. Do you have any final pieces of advice that you would like to offer to our listeners here today that could help them navigate this situation confidently?
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you're in a restaurant, a big one that I brought up initially was like communicating with your server, whether it be if you enjoy everything and you want to talk to them, or need something changed, like if your food wasn't very good or your drinks weren't very good, then be polite and just talk to them. I think that's a big part.
So people should be aware that if you make a request to your server will take it seriously. And communication with them. Tell them, I appreciate that you did this, or I like this food, or I really don't like this food, or tell them my food's cold. I'd like you to take it back and warm it up, please. My food is cold. As he said, be polite, be respectful, and you'll get your point across, no problem.
Yep.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you here today, buddy. And thank you for your advice and your direction to my listeners for any time in the future that they are in a restaurant or a bar setting. And I look forward to hopefully having another episode sometime in the future.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me.